This is just a quick tutorial showing you how you can go about preparing a model in Autodesk ReMake for 3D printing. The first thing you can do is select the model and the part of the model that you're going to want to print by using the rectangular selection tool at the bottom of the screen. You can just highlight the model and then invert the selection so the rest of the area around it is ended up being selected. You can go to the edit toolbar at the left and then delete the selection so that there's only the model and a little bit of border around the outside of it. And we're going to get rid of this border in a later step. But before we do that, I'm going to clean up all the holes here. You can do this by using the fill holes button right on the side. Now there is an automatic process that goes about this for you, but I like to do it manually just so I can see where the errors were and I can make sure that there's no errors remaining on the model. I like to fill it in with the smooth function rather than the flat function because it looks better for 3D printing. It's just a little bit more natural than having it filled in completely flat. So now I'm just going to go through and fill in all these holes. Okay, so it looks like I filled in all the holes, and now I'm just going to do a little bit of editing of the mesh to make sure that it looks good for 3D printing. The only errors I'm really going to want to fix here are these two nubs that are protruding out from the bottom of the tablet that I'm going to be printing out. So I can do this using the Surface Tools tool, and I'm going to make sure it's on smooth. I'm going to make sure the brush size is pretty small so I have control over it, and I'm just going to click this a few times and smooth it down. There's a bunch of other things I could fix, but I think in the long run, it's really not going to make too much of a difference with 3D printing. So after this, we now need to make sure that this model is solid. Right now, it's just a hollow mesh with no actual dimension to it, or rather, it's not filled in. So the way you can fix that is by using the Slice and Fill tool. So I'm going to edit, I'm going to click Slice and Fill. And right now, it wants to fill in the bottom of the model like that, but since my model is oriented the other way, I can actually change the platform using these transform planes. Make sure transform plane is selected, and that'll make sure that everything looks good. So there's a few different ways you can do this. You can transform it using these nubs here in large increments, which is what you're going to want for part of it. So I'm just going to turn this 90 degrees. And now I'm going to use this part to make it flat against the plane. So an easy way to tell if it's actually truly level with your model is to drag the plane up and find a flat surface, and then make sure that the flat surface is completely eclipsed by the plane at the same time. And you can just drag the rim on the outside to make sure it does this right. So for example, I'm just going to keep dragging this up, and I can see how the top part of it is highlighted a little bit before the bottom part. So I'm just going to drag this up once more, a few more degrees. It still needs a little bit more adjustment. And now the left is getting hit a little bit more. So we're just going to drag that a little bit. And there, it's basically flat, and that's good enough. So I'm going to drag the plane up about halfway up the model, because that's all the part that I'm going to want to be 3D printing. And I'm just going to click Apply with Fill being selected. It'll calculate it. It'll cut it off. And then, as you can see, if I change to a different view mode by pressing backspace, that it is now a basically flat plane, which is kind of cool. So the last thing you can do before it's ready to be exported is you can use the 3D print tool to check for errors. Now, I'm not actually going to be 3D printing from ReMake just because I like to have a little bit more control in other programs such as Cura, but there is the nice print tool checking issue. So it did find an error. Let's see what it thinks. So it looks like there's a little bit of a problem with the surface geometry, but I think that's actually going to end up being okay. So I'm just going to leave that. And there's another issue with it too. So rather than trying to fix that little bump there, I think it's going to be fine, so I'm just going to leave it. It shouldn't create too much of an issue in the 3D printing process. So it's always good to just go around the model one last time and make sure it looks good. Now this view mode right here is what the model's actually going to look like if you 3D printed it, because there's no textures and it doesn't show you the polygons on the surface. And it looks pretty good. So the last thing I'm going to do is click Export and then Export Model. I'm going to make sure it's on Advanced mode, so I can have proper control over it. I'm going to click Export as an STL file. Then I'm going to change the decimation percentage to about 50%. Most 3D printers can't really handle that much detail, so 50% should be more than sufficient for any printer that you throw at it. I'm going to click export. I'm going to save it to my desktop, and that's that. So now that this is done, I'm going to bring my model into Cura, because I like Cura a little bit better than the integrated 3D print tool. I'm actually going to switch over to Mac because Autodesk stopped supporting the ReMake version for Mac, and I do all of my development in 3D printing on the Mac OS operating system. So now you can see that I've imported the model into Cura. It almost never gets the scaling right, so you're inevitably going to have to fix the scaling of your model. What I'm going to do this is I'm going to look at the model, and the first thing I'm going to do is rotate it so it lies flat against the plane. Now, one easy way to do this is to either rotate it, or there is a lie flat selection. So you can do that by clicking lie flat or lay flat. And that's actually not what I wanted. So I'm going to have it rotated around once more, and let's hope it'll get it right this time. That's much better. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is scale it up. It's a little bit off the platform, so I'm going to have to move it. And that is looking pretty good right there. So I always like to check the layers before I print it, just to make sure that there's not one tiny little point in contact with the platform or something like that. So it's not going to be able to print it out in excellent detail, even if I have it at the finest layer height setting, but it's still going to look pretty cool as a finished product. I can move this down. 5% infill might be a little bit too small. So I think I'm going to change that to something like 15. And there you go. Now it looks to me like the model is ready to be 3D printed.